Today is February 24th, and the title of today's quote is Disempower Yourself. Of course, nobody would want to disempower themselves, and today's quote shows one of the ways that we disempower ourselves. And the quote reads as follows: "Blaming disempowers, handicaps, and discourages you. Thus it prevents you from realizing how you created the situation and how you can improve it. Blame is to deny karma, to deny your responsibility in a cause and effect relationship." So, you might say, it's not my fault, when it actually is, and it's not your fault. You're trying to find out the cause, so you point your finger at a cause that is not the cause, and you say, this is why we have the problem. When in actuality, if you're the cause and you don't take responsibility for it, then you can't resolve it. Blaming is a very immature way to deal with situations, and one excellent practice is to just ask yourself, in this situation in which I'm blaming someone or something for my problem, if I couldn't use that excuse, what would I do? In other words, I couldn't blame this person. I couldn't make this excuse now. So now how would I react without that excuse? Oh, I can't do this because of this. All right, Mahatma Prabhu takes away that excuse. Mahatma Prabhu tells you, you can't use that excuse. Now what are you going to do? How will you deal with the situation without that excuse? Very empowering way to look at situations. Every time you blame or make an excuse, just ask yourself, if I couldn't use this excuse, how would I deal with the situation? Because if you don't ask that question, then you will only be left with an excuse, but you won't be left with the result you would like to achieve. So therefore, it has been said wisely, you will either get results or you will get excuses why you don't get results or why you didn't get results. So, as we said here, blaming disempowers. It doesn't help. And you might say, but what if it is actually someone else's fault? Okay, so let's take that as an example. Objectively speaking, it is someone else's fault. But if you allow someone else's fault to handicap you or disempower you from achieving what you need to achieve, then essentially you're still blaming them in an indirect way because you're allowing their fault to disempower you. Or another way of saying it is you're allowing your power to be handicapped or even totally destroyed or utilized by another person. You're giving up your ability to remedy a situation by allowing another person to disempower you, even if what they did is wrong. And you could blame them, but blaming them ultimately has no redeeming value because you're not going to be successful at what you want to do. So, the main idea is blaming is disempowering, and we should always look for ways to rectify a situation. One time, the devotees were having difficulty preaching in a certain part of India, and one of the preachers went to Prabhupada and said that the people are not interested in this part of the country, and that's why we're not successful. And Prabhupada threw it back to them, and he said, the people aren't interested, or is it that you could not make them interested? And so that devotee hadn't thought that way. He just thought they're not interested. So he was blaming his lack of success on the people. And Prabhupada said, no, you shouldn't see it that way. You should see that it is your inability to interest them in Krishna consciousness. That's the problem. So a lot of times we'll blame situations and we won't realize how we are responsible. So if we can turn questions around and say, in what way could I make it better? Or in what way am I responsible? Now you might think, at first sight, I'm not really responsible because these other people are creating the situation, not me. But if we take the premise that I'm responsible, just for the sake of questioning ourselves. Okay, let's take the premise that I'm responsible for the problems here. I'm responsible for the problems in my family. I'm responsible for the problems in my temple, my community. Or if you even want to become bold, I'm responsible for the problems in ISKCON. And if you accepted that, theoretically, then you'd ask yourself, okay, well, what would I do now? If that's true, how could I live differently? How could I think differently? How could I act differently to resolve this problem, to make things better? And you will find there are things, perhaps, that you haven't thought of yet that you could do if you take that level of responsibility. So it's a great question to ask yourself, how could I make this situation better? It's my fault that it is not going the way it's going. And Mother Teresa said, when asked, what's the problem in the world? She said, the problem in the world is that I am a sinner. So she took that upon herself. We can say, what is the problem with ISKCON? The problem is I'm not a pure devotee. That's the real problem with ISKCON, is that I am not a pure devotee. So I need to work on becoming pure, and that will resolve so many problems. Hare Krishna.